Hey guys, tonight we're winding our way back to the gaslit streets of 1880s London. You're wrapped in a wool coat that smells faintly of coal smoke, walking slowly through a thick evening fog. Horse hooves clatter on cobblestones somewhere in the distance, and behind you, something or someone seems to shuffle along, just out of sight. You pause, turn, and of course, there's nothing. Or is there? You're here for a purpose ghost hunting, but not the jump scare camera shaking kind. No, tonight is a slow, candlelit crawl through drawing rooms, attics, and basements where the ghosts wear cravats and moan with impeccable diction. You carry the tools of a proper Victorian ghost enthusiast, a lantern, a notebook, and yes, measuring tape. Not for furniture, but for phantoms. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up a front step, slick with damp, feeling the weight of the evening pressed down like the fog itself. You're about to enter a stately London townhouse, the kind with marble lions flanking the front and ivy coiling like restless fingers around iron fences. The door creaks as you push it open, not for dramatic effect, but because the hinges haven't seen oil since Queen Victoria's coronation. Inside, the scent of age hits you, old books, extinguished candles, and that faint musty sweetness of time-stained wallpaper. Every step on the floorboard sounds like a groan. Your host, Professor Whitby, greets you in a whisper, because ghost hunters, you're told, must never raise their voices. It disturbs the threshold energies. Or perhaps just the parlor maid trying to sleep upstairs. You take your place among a small group of thrill-seekers, a retired naval officer who once swore he saw a banshee in Gibraltar, a widow in purple who claims to receive nightly visits from her deceased husband, and occasionally his mother, and a journalist from the Illustrated London News, who ironically never writes anything down. The room is dim, but not dark. A gas lamp hisses softly in the corner, its flickering flame making shadows dance just enough to test your peripheral vision. There's a fireplace, cold and soot black, with an ornate clock perched above it. Every tick sounds like a tap on bone. You notice something odd. The chairs in the room aren't placed for comfort, but for symmetry. Precisely aligned, evenly spaced, as if the spirits care about interior design. And indeed, your host explains that symmetry pleases the dead, as does Silence lavender water and the complete absence of garlic. Tonight's agenda isn't just waiting for moans or floating tableware. You're here to conduct a proper ghost inspection. That means observing, recording, and, strangely enough, measuring. Professor Whitby pulls out a gleaming brass tape measure and carefully lays it across the carpet, noting the exact distance between the armchair and the fireplace. "We'll want to compare this after the sitting," he whispers. Last time, the chair moved precisely 6 inches toward the chimney. You blink. Did it shuffle itself over? Or did someone nudge it while reaching for tea? Historians still argue whether Victorian ghost hunters were meticulous observers or just really imaginative decorators. There's something curiously soothing about the orderliness of it all. Ghost hunting in this era isn't some raucous spectacle. It's practically a hobby for the quiet, the lonely, and the mathematically inclined. It's less about terror and more about tranquil curiosity, the supernatural treated like botany, calm, methodical, and just spooky enough to raise your heartbeat slightly. The group begins by sitting in a circle and linking hands. You hesitate for a moment, then grip the naval officer's knobby fingers with one hand and the widow's perfumed palm with the other. The room hushes, the clock ticks, and the curtains twitch, probably just a draft, but someone gasps anyway. Professor Whitby calls for silence and begins reciting a spirit invitation. It's half prayer, half legal. Summons, politely asking any residual energies or trans-dimensional presences to make themselves known. You suppress the urge to cough. Then, it begins the waiting. You sit in silence for what feels like hours. Your back stiffens, your legs fall asleep, and your thoughts drift toward crumpets. But the quiet is part of the ritual. You're meant to listen to the house, to the air, even to the strange pressure behind your ears. Is it a ghost, or just the headache of holding still too long? Finally, a soft creak. Not loud, but just enough to make everyone's heads turn in slow motion. The widow nods solemnly. "That's the sound he makes," she whispers. You don't ask who he is. The measuring tape comes out again. You all rise and watch as Whitby checks the chair. It hasn't moved, but the lamp's fringe is tilted at an angle that no one can explain. Ghost gravity, or the cat you didn't know the house had. This is how it begins, not with screams or slamming doors, but with tiny shifts, odd echoes, and obsessive note-taking. And it's strangely comforting, like you're part of something secret and slow, a club that investigates eternity 1 inch at a time. You pull your coat tighter not from fear, but from the chill that seems to settle in these rooms. Whether it's the ghosts or just the drafty architecture, you can't tell. And honestly, you don't really want to know. Not yet. You find yourself following Professor Whitby down a narrow hallway, lined with portraits whose eyes follow you just a little too convincingly. Their faces are all long noses, necks, expressions. One gentleman with exceptional sideburns seems particularly judgmental. The carpet is worn, but soft, muffling your steps. Still, you walk like someone afraid to wake a sleeping house. You're being led to the drawing room of something altogether stranger, the very first ghost club. It sounds like a society for Halloween-loving children, but in Victorian London it was no laughing matter. Founded around 1862, allegedly by scholars from Cambridge, and later embraced by prestigious institutions, the Ghost Club was serious about the supernatural. More serious than you'd think for men who spent their days studying Latin roots and sipping tea under oil portraits of even older scholars. Whitby gestures toward a high-backed chair as if offering you the throne. You sit gingerly. The fabric is itchy. Across from you, a bespectacled gentleman with a monocle is adjusting a brass pendulum which he insists detects spiritual vibrations. You nod solemnly. You're still trying to figure out which pocket to put your skepticism in. The meeting opens with a reading from a local newspaper, an obituary, but not of a person. This one mourns a haunted carriage house recently demolished to make way for a new row of shops. Apparently, it had once played host to a footman's ghost who only appeared when someone forgot to tip the stable boy. The members of the Ghost Club discuss this with real gravitas. There's talk of residual mourning energy and whether ghosts can be evicted along with tenants. You suppress a yawn, not because you're bored, but because the room is warm and the voices drone with the same pleasant rhythm as a train rolling through countryside. This club is oddly academic. Ghost sightings are dissected like Shakespeare sonnets. A flickering candle, a draft, a tapping on the window pane, a magpie, but a shadow seen at exactly 2:17 a.m. 3 nights in a row. Now that's worth documenting. They keep records, painstaking handwritten accounts of every incident, time, temperature, angle of moonlight, emotional state of witnesses, and whether or not Mrs. Pendleton's dog barked. You glance at a thick ledger with ornate inked columns and neat looping cursive. Every page smells faintly of mildew and obsession. Precision is our watchword. Whitby intones as he adjusts the wick of an oil lamp. Without it, we're just imaginative fools. Historians still argue whether this precision was scientific rigor or just a genteel way to avoid admitting that no one really knew what they were doing. But the Ghost Club didn't care. They were here for the thrill of documentation, the discipline of the unseen. Measuring what others would laugh at or scream from, you're handed your own tools, a tiny hourglass, a ruler, and a slate board to record any spiritual observations. Someone hands you chalk as if it's a sword. You draw a little squiggle and pretend it means something. The club's current focus is on repetitive hauntings, also called residual spirits. These ghosts, you're told, don't interact with the living. They simply repeat. A crying maid on the stairs. A man in boots who walks through a door that no longer exists. Like a skipping phonograph of sadness. One member posits that these hauntings might be the result of emotional static embedded in stone. He uses the phrase psychogeological imprinting with absolute sincerity. You nod again, trying to look like someone who has definitely read about that. The room grows quieter. Someone lights incense not for the spirits apparently, but for mood clarity. It smells like cinnamon and wet twigs. You shift in your seat, noticing the shadows have stretched. The monocled man has fallen asleep. His head tips forward with a soft thunk, and no one moves to wake him. It's part of the ambiance, you suppose. This, you realize, is ghost hunting as the Victorians did it. Less adrenaline, more ambiance. You're not bursting into abandoned hospitals or yelling in night vision. You're sipping tepid tea and waiting for someone to politely knock from the other side. There's something oddly satisfying about it. The quiet, the ritual, the slow stacking of small peculiar facts. A candle burns down a little faster than expected. A draft lifts the fringe of a curtain at an hour no one recorded. A portrait tilts 1 degree overnight. Are these clues? Or just the fidgeting of an old house nobody in the Ghost Club really knows? But they act like they do, and that makes it strangely believable. You glance down at the slate in your lap. You've drawn a spiral. Below it, you write, "Feeling watched," possibly by oil painting. Must confirm. And then as the gaslight dims and someone starts snoring softly in the corner, you lean back and close your eyes. Not to sleep, at least not yet, but to listen. For creaks. For whispers. For the quiet hum of history, insisting it isn't quite finished. You're back in the parlor, and the séance is about to begin. You didn't expect it to feel so domestic. There's a doily on every surface and a faint smell of marmalade from a tea service that was wheeled out an hour ago. The widow in purple has brought her own lace handkerchief, which she presses to her forehead every time someone mentions the veil. Tonight's event is what they call a light séance. Not because the atmosphere is jovial, though the naval officer has told two slightly risque jokes, but because full darkness is frowned upon. Spirits apparently prefer to show themselves in low flickering light. Total darkness, it seems, leads only to stubbed toes and accidental contact with the tea trolley. You take your seat at the round table polished to a mirror sheen. A cloth has been draped over it embroidered with protective symbols, a key and eye, and what looks suspiciously like a badly stitched hedgehog. You try not to stare. Mrs. Cavendish, the medium for the evening, arrives precisely 5 minutes late. Spirits dislike punctuality, she announces, which is convenient. She's wearing a floating sort of shawl and smells faintly of rosewater and onions. The group quiets as she begins. Her voice is low, deliberate, and soothing in the way a lullaby can be soothing right up until the moment the rocking horse moves on its own. She closes her eyes. The room stills. You feel a shift not in the air exactly, but in the way your skin registers the space around it. Like someone just entered silently and stood exactly behind you. Of course, when you peek, there's nothing, except the wallpaper. Always the wallpaper. The table creaks. Someone lets out a gasp, and then the tapping begins. Faint, deliberate somewhere under the floorboards. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Mrs. Cavendish holds up one finger. 1 for yes, she whispers. 2 for no. Everyone freezes. The questions begin. Is someone with us? Tap. Are you a man? Tap. Did you die in this house? Tap, tap. You try not to smile. The idea that a ghost would obey such a specific protocol feels both ridiculous and entirely appropriate. Victorian ghosts you're learning are polite. They answer in Morse code and refuse to move a chair without formal invitation. At one point, Mrs. Cavendish appears to go into a trance. Her head droops and her hand moves across the table in a slow circle. She begins describing a man in brown woolen trousers and a tweed cap, which admittedly describes about 90% of 19th century men. Still, the naval officer gasps and whispers Uncle Jeffrey. You glance around. The shadows haven't shifted, and the tea trolley remains untouched, but still, you feel something. A weight, a presence, or maybe it's just the sugar crash from 3 too many custard creams. The séance proceeds in waves, questions taps the occasional involuntary sigh. Someone's monocle falls off, and for a moment the entire group focuses on retrieving it, like a team of ghost-curious meerkats. Then, back to business. A sudden breeze passes through the room. The candle flames lean sharply left, then settle. Everyone looks at the curtains. They haven't moved. Historians still argue whether such moments are genuine phenomena or simply the product of shared expectation. The power of group psychology, they say, can conjure more ghosts than a haunted abbey. But you're not here to settle the debate. You're here to notice the way your pulse skips when something rustles behind you. And it's during this lull that Whitby clears his throat and reaches into a velvet pouch. I think he says it's time to measure. He pulls out a roll of tape, the kind a tailor might use, only his is reinforced with brass ends. With practiced care, he measures the distance between the chair legs, then from the base of the table to the curtain, then, oddly, from the window frame to the middle of the rug. Spirits don't move far. He explains, but they do shift things just enough. Someone suggests checking for impressions in the carpet. Another begins sketching the room's layout on a note card, marking each teacup like it's part of a crime scene. This, it turns out, is Victorian ghost hunting at its most intense, small details magnified meaning. And somehow it's working. Not in the sense that you believe there's a spirit sipping invisible tea beside you, but because your mind has adjusted to the pace. The soft voices, the flickering shadows, the deliberate, methodical search for something just past perception. You jot down a note in your provided ledger, Time 9:42 p.m. Phenomenon tapping beneath feet, possibly structural or possum. Temperature chill increasing. Emotional state cautiously enchanted. And as the session winds down, Mrs. Cavendish opens her eyes with theatrical slowness and says, "He's gone now." Just like that. No fanfare, no spinning chandeliers or overturned furniture. Just a slow exhale and a creaky floorboard as everyone begins to rise. You gather your tools, measuring tape, notebook, half-drunk tea, and follow the others out into the hallway still thick with oil lamp haze and old secrets. As you pass one of the portraits again, you could swear the expression has changed just slightly. You don't look twice. Not tonight. You're kneeling on the floor now, elbows sinking into an impossibly plush Persian rug brass measuring tape in hand. It feels a bit ridiculous, like you're trying to estimate whether a faint wisp of spirit energy took a half step toward the sideboard. And yet, this is precisely what Victorian ghost hunters did. Every object in the room becomes suspect. The placement of a chair leg, the angle of a teacup, even the length of the fringe on a lampshade might, according to Whitby, indicate a shift in metaphysical current. You arch a brow at that one, but still you find yourself jotting down the fringe length, just in case. The measuring tape extends with a satisfying metallic flick, landing against the wooden base of the armoire. You measure from the front foot to the edge of the rug, 36 1/4 inches. Whitby peers over your shoulder and nods gravely. Last week he whispers it was 35 3/4. You both stare at the number. Did the armoire move? Or did the rug wrinkle slightly during the séance? Did someone nudge it with a boot while retrieving a dropped monocle? These are reasonable possibilities. But reason, as you're learning, isn't the primary currency in Victorian ghost investigations. It's all about patterns, rituals, repetitions, and just enough data to make you question your own conclusions. Historians still argue whether these tape-wielding investigators were being precise for precision's sake, or whether they genuinely believed ghosts abided by geometric boundaries. Some sources suggest they thought spirits could only manifest within defined areas, like squares of spiritual activity outlined on the floor like chalk crime scenes. Which is why you now find yourself taping a border around the hearth. Rug. Active zone. Whitby labels it. You write it down too because everyone else is writing, and you're not about to be the one person who didn't log a haunting properly. The air has grown cooler, though you're not sure if it's the spirits or the fact that the maid has opened a window upstairs and the draft snakes through the old walls like a curious ghost of its own. You notice a pile of chalk in the corner of the room, not for drawing summoning circles as you first imagined, but for marking disturbances. The idea is that if anything shifts during the night, an ottoman, a door, even a candlestick, the outline will betray it. You imagine waking up to find the chalk line broken and a chair tilted. You try to convince yourself that sounds silly, but it doesn't. You continue measuring. The fireplace to the writing desk, the distance between two identical armchairs, the width of the hallway opening. You're beginning to feel less like a ghost hunter and more like an interior decorator with a flair for the dramatic. Spirits. Whitby says as he paces the room, don't just appear, they occupy. You nod slowly. It makes sense in the same way that thunder before a storm feels like it has intent. A prelude to something you can't quite name. At one point, someone brings out a spirit-level yes, a literal carpenter's tool, and checks the floorboards. It seems the room has a subtle slope barely noticeable unless you're measuring. This might explain why the chair leg moved, or it might just complicate things. But to the Ghost Club, it doesn't matter. The measurement is the proof. The method is the magic. They want to believe, but they want to do it in a waistcoated clipboard-carrying sort of way. You settle onto a velvet poof tape in your lap and reflect on how much ghost hunting feels like birdwatching. You sit still. You wait. You hope to spot something faint, fleeting, and possibly imaginary. And when you do, the excitement isn't in the scream, it's in the notation. The widow flips through her own logbook and proudly announces she once tracked the movement of a haunted tea cart over 3 months. It began in the kitchen and ended up in the parlor, unpushed, unseen. Always at dawn, she says, precisely at 6:04. Someone murmurs, residual energy, surely. Another notes the time in his pocket ledger. This is the language of the seance crowd. Not horror, but quiet awe. They don't chase ghosts. They wait for them to drift by, leave a chair askew, or cause a candlestick to tremble ever so slightly. You glance once more at the armoire. It hasn't moved again. Yet. Later, as the group retires for tea and sponge cake, you linger in the room. You roll the measuring tape back into its brass housing, listening to the soft whir as it winds. There's something soothing about it, something oddly reassuring, as though you're not just measuring furniture, you're measuring the distance between belief and doubt, between what creaks and what whispers. As you rise and follow the scent of steeped Earl Grey, you pause one last time at the rug. 36¼ inches. You don't know if it matters, but you write it down anyway. Because in this house, in this moment, with the gas lamps flickering and the measuring tape snug in your palm, it feels like it might. You find yourself standing in the scullery with a spoonful of something slimy and suspicious. Whitby has just handed it to you in a porcelain dish with all the pride of a man presenting fine caviar. This, he says with a twinkle in his eye, is ectoplasm. It looks like the sad middle child of tapioca pudding and expired custard. You squint, swirl it gently, and sniff. Oddly floral, with an undercurrent of damp cellar. I made it myself, he adds. You pause, spoon hovering midair. From. He waves a hand airily. It's mostly goose fat with a touch of rosewater, just to simulate what's been documented. Victorian ghost hunters, you discover, had a flair for the dramatic. Ectoplasm, a term that would later become a pop culture staple, began right here, in dim rooms, with overripe wallpaper, and people describing gelatinous substances oozing from mediums' mouths' ears, or other, less charming places. You don't eat the ectoplasm, but you do poke it with the back end of your pencil. It jiggles, suspiciously. Mrs. Cavendish once claimed to produce a stringy, translucent strand of ectoplasm from her sleeve during a séance. It fluttered like a ribbon, she said, and smelled faintly of violets. One member described it as celestial cheesecloth. Another thought it looked a bit like the netting used in wedding veils. Historians still argue whether any of it was real. Some believe it was sleight of hand mediums hiding muslin in their mouths, or using egg whites soaked in perfume. Others think it was mass suggestion. You see what you expect to see, especially when someone next to you gasps and clutches their pearls. In one particularly memorable case, a medium was discovered to have stuffed a pig's bladder with soap flakes and hidden it inside her corset. During the séance, she delivered the object with great trembling and spiritual groans. It was later found under the table, smelling faintly of lavender and livestock. Whitby is aware of these tales. He considers them part of the charm, not the embarrassment. We walk the line between sincerity and spectacle, he explains. The spirits may not be real, but the effects certainly are. You try to ask a thoughtful question, something about whether the presence of ectoplasm always accompanied a certain temperature drop. But your focus drifts again to the texture of the substance now seeping into the bottom of the dish. It looks like someone's pet jellyfish has melted. The Ghost Club has a protocol. If ectoplasm is found, it must be described in detail, consistency, color, temperature, and emotional response. Queasy but intrigued seems accurate, and you pencil it in. You're told about other variants: phosphorescent ectoplasm that glows faintly in the dark, dry ectoplasm that flakes like ash, even scented ectoplasm which supposedly smells like the deceased's favorite cologne. You're skeptical, but also kind of impressed. The commitment to the bit is immense. Of course, ectoplasm isn't the only thing mediums claim to produce. There were also spirit hands, molded wax appendages, that supposedly floated through the air to touch participants gently on the cheek. Some were even found still warm, clutching calling cards with the names of long-dead lovers. One infamous séance had a spirit hand that clutched a fork and tried to steal a biscuit. The host was understandably offended. You make a mental note if contacted by the dead, offer tea, not snacks. Whitby shows you a collection of old hand molds. Some are delicate, childlike. Others are large, masculine, and suspiciously similar to his own. They're displayed in a velvet-lined case next to a silver bell that once rang by itself. You ring it once for good luck. It sounds like your grandmother's cat collar. The sheer theatricality of these artifacts is part of their appeal. Ghost hunting in this time and place is less about horror and more about curiosity, performance, and community. There's something deeply human about it, this longing to believe in something beyond, and the willingness to create it when it doesn't arrive on cue. You return the dish to the scullery and wash your hands 3 times. The goose fat lingers. The night continues with more discussion. A lively debate breaks out about the proper conditions for ectoplasmic emergence. Moonlight insists one club member. Excess humidity argues another. Whitby claims success during thunderstorms, but only if the medium has recently eaten rhubarb. You try to take notes, but your page is Mostly drawings of squiggly lines and a ghost wearing a top hat. Eventually, everyone settles into soft armchairs and the conversation drifts. You sip tepid tea and listen as someone recounts a story of ectoplasm found in a library wrapped around the spine of a book on gardening. Spirits with a green thumb, someone jokes. You glance again at your log and underline the word tactile, because that's what stands out most about all of this. Ghosts here aren't just whispers or flickering lights, they're physical. They ooze. They leave behind residue. They might, if you're lucky, rearrange the china. And that makes the experience strangely intimate. The fireplace pops. Someone chuckles softly, and Whitby begins cleaning his measuring tape with a cloth dipped in lemon oil. You find yourself thinking maybe it wasn't about proving the afterlife. Maybe it was just about making it feel reachable. You stretch your legs and check your own tools. The tape is intact, the logbook half full, and your hands still smell a little like spectral poultry. Not a bad start. You're standing at the threshold of an ivy-choked Victorian manor just outside Ridding. The train dropped you off half an hour ago and your boots are now properly soaked from a bog-like garden path. But none of that matters because tonight you're ghost hunting with the ladies. A rarity. In most Victorian societies, women in spiritualist circles weren't just participants. They were often the stars of the séance scene. Mediums, observers, record keepers, and occasionally full-blown spirit diplomats. And you're here with one of the most dedicated all-female ghost inspection teams this side of the Thames. They greet you in matching cloaks, velvet of course, and carry lanterns with etched glass panes depicting angelic figures. The effect is somewhere between a mystical Girl Scout troop and an elite cabal of librarians on a mission. The leader is Miss Thornberry, a tall woman with a lantern jaw and a sharp tongue. We investigate the dead, she says, not entertain them. Her voice cuts through the fog like a hatchet wrapped in embroidery. You're quickly briefed. The target of tonight's session is the East Wing parlor, specifically a lace-draped fainting couch where the previous owner, Lady Elspeth, allegedly expired during a spirited game of whist. Ever since house staff have reported hearing the tinkle of cards being shuffled in the empty room. And once the sound of someone muttering, "Trump, that Reginald." You follow the women down the hallway, your boots leaving faint marks on the waxed floor. The parlor is warm, lit by a single oil lamp with a lacy shade. Everything smells faintly of cinnamon and furniture polish. The fainting couch in question is already outlined with chalk. Miss Thornberry assigns roles. You note-taker, she says, pointing at you. She barks to a younger member chalk detail. Keep the marks fresh. Everyone else takes a post around the room watching the curtains, the fireplace, and an especially judgmental ceramic bulldog. And then it begins. No dramatic chanting, no summoning circles. Just observation. And listening. A teacup rattles on its saucer. Someone takes a sharp breath. A draft from the window causes the curtain to sway like it's trying to whisper secrets. You check your notes. 9:17 p.m. Fabric motion detected. Wind from east. Possible Lady Elspeth. One of the women takes out a small bell and places it carefully on the edge of the fainting couch. Last time she murmurs it rang at 9:24. Everyone leans slightly forward. The clock ticks. You hear the rain picking up outside, tapping the windows like impatient fingers. And inside, the silence hums like something just waiting to be acknowledged. And then ting. The bell trembles but doesn't fall. The team doesn't gasp. They don't scream. Instead, they spring into action. One measures the shift in the bell's position using, of course, a measuring tape. Another logs the time and atmospheric details. Miss Thornberry announces Elsbeth always was punctual. Historians still argue whether the efficiency of women in spiritualism was the product of exclusion from formal scientific circles or a natural gravitation toward intuitive observation. Whatever the reason, this team is good. Almost too good. You're barely scribbling your notes when they're already setting up a new perimeter. Around the lace curtains, convinced the spirit energy is moving clockwise. Spirits like routine, one woman says with a shrug. And lace. The couch becomes a character in its own right. Everyone treats it with reverence as though Lady Elspeth might still be reclined there shuffling her ghostly deck. You notice a cold spot hovering just above the armrest. Someone measures it with a ribbon thermometer. 3 degrees lower. They confirm, nodding, like physicians confirming a diagnosis. You're beginning to see how much ghost hunting, at least in these circles, overlaps with household management. Every sound has a source, every movement a reason. If not in the world of the living, then certainly in the world of the spirited. It's like solving a mystery, where the only clue is a flickering lamp and a rug. that might have shifted 2 inches west. And yet you're hooked. One of the younger women offers you a peppermint. Prevents spiritual dizziness, she says matter-of-factly. You don't ask what that means. You just nod and chew. They start the second part of their session mirror monitoring. 2 women take seats facing a large, gilt-edged mirror eyes, scanning for movement not reflected in the physical room. It's an eerie exercise. You try it too, and for a moment, you'd swear you saw something dart just behind the ottoman. But when you turn nothing, just that bulldog statue, still judging, the session continues into the night calm and controlled. You begin to appreciate the gentle cadence of the work, the discipline, the attention to detail. If this were a story told over whiskey in a smoky pub, it'd be full of howling ghosts and spectral screams. But here, with these women, it's all lace lanterns and barely there disturbances treated like sacred signals. When they finally call an end to the session, everyone rises slowly. Thank Lady Elsbeth Miss Thornberry in tones. And everyone does, out loud, politely. You pack up your tools, including a slightly bent measuring tape that now feels more like a wand than a ruler. And as you step outside into the damp night, you realize something unexpected. You feel seen. Not by the women, not even by the ghosts, but by the house. Like it watched you observe and quietly nodded its approval. You don't look back at the window, but you're sure you saw a flicker of movement behind the curtain. You're in a dusty back room now staring down the metallic barrel of a camera the size of a steamer trunk. It has brass fittings, an accordion bellows, and a tripod that could double as scaffolding. This, you're told, is the latest in ghost-detecting technology, spirit photography. Whitby adjusts the lens cap like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Spirits tend to appear just over the left shoulder. He mutters, gesturing for you to sit still on a straight-backed chair positioned in front of an antique tapestry that smells of mothballs and unresolved grief. The room is dim on purpose. Victorian spirit photographers believed that too much light scared ghosts away. Too little, and you just got smudges. The sweet spot apparently is somewhere between twilight and did you forget to pay the gas bill. You pose awkwardly, chin-tilted, trying not to look like someone pretending to be haunted. Whitby vanishes under the camera hood. A click. A flash. The smell of magnesium fills the air like burnt fairy dust. That'll take an hour to develop, he says, emerging from the fabric with soot-streaked eyebrows and a hopeful gleam in his eye. Victorian spirit photography wasn't just a hobby, it was an obsession. Starting in the 1860s, people began showing up in photographs with wispy faces hovering nearby or translucent hands resting on their shoulders. Sometimes the spirits wore bonnets. Sometimes they looked suspiciously like recently deceased relatives. Occasionally, they resembled the photographer's assistant. Historians still argue whether spirit photography was pure fraud, accidental double exposure, or something more enigmatic. William Mumler, one of the earliest ghost photographers, was even taken to court for allegedly faking his images. His defense: the spirits came willingly. You sip lukewarm tea while Whitby opens a cabinet filled with glass plate negatives. This one, he says, was taken at a séance in Bath. Note the floating hat. You squint. Sure enough, just above a seated woman's head is what looks like a bowler hat suspended in midair. No face, no head, just hat. He flips to another. A baby cradled in a woman's arms. Next to her, a hazy form with what might be a beard. Her grandfather, he explains. She never met him but claimed to recognize the scent of pipe smoke when the image was taken. The camera equipment is elaborate. Weighted tripods, silver-coated glass, flash pans loaded with explosive powder. There's a whole ritual to it, much like the séances, just with more sneezing and the risk of mild combustion. You're handed a freshly developed photograph from the last session. It still damp smells faintly of vinegar and shows you staring blankly ahead. Over your left shoulder, a shape. Blurry, faint, but definitely there. Whitby leans in. Do you see it? You hesitate. Maybe. Possibly. Could just be a curtain, or dust, or the unfortunate shadow of your own ear. But in this room under these lamps in the company of a man whose eyes sparkle with the thrill of ambiguity, you nod. Definitely something, you say. He beams. Knew it. There's a strange comfort in the ritual of it all. Sit still. Wait. Let the exposure capture something you can't see with your eyes. If it doesn't appear well, the spirits were shy. If it does, you've got proof. or at least something you can frame and display at your next ghost club meeting. You're shown the infamous curtain apparition photo. Next. A medium in profile, eyes rolled back with what looks like a handprint pressed against the fabric behind her. We checked afterward. Whitby says no handprint on the curtain. He pauses dramatically. Not from this side anyway. The group goes silent for a moment. The kind of silence that invites goosebumps. Photography in the Victorian ghost hunting world wasn't just a method, it was practically divine. The idea that you could capture the dead, freeze them in silver and glass, preserve them like pressed flowers, it was irresistible. Proof they thought not just of ghosts, but of continuity, memory, love that refused to fade. You look again at your photo. The shape over your shoulder really is eerie, even if you suspect it's just a smudge. But you don't say that aloud. Instead, you take a soft pencil and circle the form, labeling it simply presence. Because part of the experience you're realizing isn't certainty, it's participation. It's leaning into the not knowing. It's treating your curiosity with care, like a candle you're carrying through a dark hallway full of portraits that might blink when you're not looking. You pack away your notebook, roll your measuring tape back into its case, and let Whitby tuck the photograph into a protective envelope. For your files, he says solemn as a judge, and as you step out of the photography room past the velvet curtain that always seems to sway just a little too much, you begin to understand it's not about proving the ghost. It's about making space for the possibility. You're bundled up now, lantern in one hand and thermometer in the other, as you step into the oldest part of the manor, the cellar corridor. It smells like damp stone, ancestral regrets, and something faintly pickled. The walls sweat with moisture. The floor is slick in that way that invites slipping either into another room or another realm depending on your level of optimism. Whitby explains as he lights the path ahead that this part of the house is notorious for thermal fluctuations. In the Victorian ghost hunting world, temperature drops are one of the most popular ways to detect a presence. Not a bang, not a whisper, just a small localized chill. The ghostly equivalent of someone breathing down your neck in line at the post office. You're instructed to take readings every few feet. The thermometer is the kind that looks like it could also be used to measure the temperature of a roast. You hold it steady against the stone watch the mercury settle. 58 degrees, you whisper. Note that Whitby says. Now, move 3 steps forward. You do. The next reading, 54. Active corridor, he whispers, like you've just discovered a portal to another dimension. He scribbles in his notebook and encourages you to walk back the other way. As you do, the air feels different just slightly, like it thickens in patches. You wonder whether it's your imagination or if the draft patterns really are that weird. Historians still argue whether ghosts cause cold spots or if our bodies react to anxiety by interpreting random temperature shifts as paranormal. The Victorians, for their part, believed spirits drew energy from the air around them, leading to a chill that could be mapped with patience and a very steady hand. You stop in front of a low archway and take another reading. 52 degrees. Whitby places a candle on the ground and watches the flame flicker sideways. Consistent cross-draft, he mutters, then adds, or perhaps a residual footprint of unrest. A polite way of saying maybe the ghost of someone who never got to finish their sherry. The cellar has a series of small doors. Wine storage, former coal rooms, perhaps a secret poker den. One is slightly ajar. Whitby nods toward it. Shall we? You open it slowly. Inside, darkness clots in the corners. You click on your lantern and step in. The temperature plummets. This isn't just a draft. You shiver. Your breath hangs in the air, like an unanswered question. Reading, he asks. 49. You both stare. Then you take 3 paces back, 54. Forward again, back to 49. This apparently is thrilling. You chalk a line on the floor, mark the boundary zone, and set a small bell on the threshold. If the air shifts again, it might ring. Or not. You're beginning to suspect that ghosts have a sense of humor when it comes to scientific expectations. The group joins you after a few minutes. They carry more candles, a logbook, and a device that looks suspiciously like a cheese grater, but is apparently a vibration translator. You don't ask how it works. It buzzes once and is declared inconclusive. Someone shares a theory, spirits being electromagnetic in nature cause molecules in the air to contract. This, in turn, creates a perceivable drop in temperature. You nod along, knowing full well that the Victorian science here is mostly stitched together with copper wire and confidence. And yet it feels real. You feel watched. You feel seen. You feel cold. As the group moves further into the cellar, they take readings like medieval cartographers. 55, 53, 51. Each drop is met with raised brows and slightly faster note-taking. Someone places a lace glove on the floor to see if it moves. Someone else brings out a compass. The needle spins near the wall, she says. Magnetic interference, or poltergeist breath. You raise your lantern to examine the wall more closely. There's a small depression like someone pressed their palm there. 100 years ago. And the stone never forgot. You touch it. It's colder than anything else. Whitby taps your shoulder. Feel it too. You nod. He produces the measuring tape again and outlines the perimeter around the cold patch. The Ghost Club refers to this process as spirit grid mapping, and it's one part science, one part performance art. You write section cellar south wall, reading 48 degrees shape oval. Depth undefined, presence passive but undeniable. Someone sneezes. The candle flames lean dramatically toward the door. A mouse scurries past, oblivious to your spiritual cartography. You begin to understand the allure of this work. It's not the thrill of discovery, it's the intimacy of observation. You're not chasing ghosts. You're listening for them in the way you'd listen for a clock ticking behind a wall. Eventually, the cold spot fades. Or maybe you just acclimate. The group agrees to log it as a temporary manifestation of probable unrest. You place a ribbon on the doorknob like a bookmark in the house's long, slow story. And as you leave the cellar, you take one last look back. The space is still quiet and dark. But your body remembers the chill. It settles in your collarbones, just beneath the skin. Not fear, just presence. You're back upstairs now, boots leaving faint ghost prints on a checkerboard floor of black slate and white marble. The walls rise around you in heavy oak paneling carved with scenes of hunting parties, biblical warnings, and because this is a Victorian manor, at least one depiction of cherubs misbehaving near a fruit bowl. Whitby leads you to the western wing to a hall lined with Gothic arches and stained glass windows. Architecture matters, he says, pausing to point at a buttress. Spirits love symmetry, but drafts love asymmetry. You're about to laugh when a sudden whistle of wind curls through the hallway, lifting your scarf and extinguishing the nearest candle. No windows are open. No one is moving. You relight it slowly. This is where it gets tricky. In houses like this, built with soaring ceilings and more unused rooms than sensible plumbing, it's hard to separate haunting from habitat. That knocking sound. Probably a pipe. That sighing noise might be the wind slipping through a cracked window pane behind a tapestry. Or it could be something else. The Victorians were obsessed with architecture. They believed certain designs enhanced or restricted spiritual movement. A circular turret, for instance, might trap energy, while an L-shaped corridor was believed to confuse ghosts into staying put. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were grounded in ancient folk traditions or just the product of deeply bored aristocrats with too much time and not enough insulation. Either way, you're now crawling under a cathedral-style window, measuring the gap between its stone sill and the warped wood floor. It's precisely 2 inches. Enough space for a full-bodied specter to slip through Whitby Muse's completely straight-faced. This part of the house is infamous for a specific event, the apparition of the curtain shift. One evening in the early 1870s, a group of gentlemen seated in high-backed chairs swore they saw a velvet curtain lift and twist into the shape of a woman's profile. No breeze, no movement from the outside, just the slow, deliberate folding of fabric into something resembling a sigh. You're shown the exact spot. The curtain hangs heavy and red with fringe the length of an index finger. You examine the rod's solid brass. You kneel, measure the distance from the curtain's edge to the floor. 1 3/4 inches. Whitby notes it with satisfaction. Same as the reports. You remain still watching, waiting. The wind outside rattles a window pane. The candle flickers, but the curtain doesn't move. Still, you feel watched. Not maliciously, not even curiously, just watched. As if the house itself is aware you're mapping its secrets. You take another set of readings. Temperature stable. Floor tilt negligible. Draft presence faint. Paranormal presence. Maybe it's a familiar maybe. The kind that sits just behind your thoughts like an old song you can't quite remember the lyrics to. One of the other investigators suggests placing flour on the floor, just a sprinkle. If anything walks across it overnight, you'll know. You're reminded of crime scene techniques, and suddenly ghost hunting feels like forensic theater. Someone else pulls out a long silk ribbon and dangles it from the curtain rod. Watch for movement, she says, especially without a breeze. You wait. 10 minutes pass. 15. Then the ribbon twists slightly. Just once. Everyone freezes. It's not much, not a spin. Just the kind of motion a curious child might make tentative shy. You check the window. Closed. The walls solid. Your measuring tape confirms no movement in the baseboards. You record it anyway, because that's the rule. Incident ribbon twist 11:42 p.m. Cause unknown. Emotion mixed curiosity and the urge to casually walk away. The Gothic architecture contributes to the experience. Shadows fall where they shouldn't. Doors creak with impeccable timing. One panel in the wall carved to resemble ivy bulges, just enough to suggest it might open if you pushed it the right way. Whitby tells you some ghosts are tied to the geometry of a space. Angles, echoes, and acoustics all matter. In one case, he says a staircase with precisely 13 steps caused recurring sightings of a woman in black. They added a 14th step, and the haunting stopped. It's probably nonsense. But you measure the height of the curtain rod anyway. 12 feet 3 inches. Suspiciously high for a standard window. Just high enough for the kind of presence that floats rather than walks. The group wraps up its observation with a small ritual. A bell ring, a thank you whisper, and a collective glance toward the curtain. It remains still. You leave the hallway in silence, stepping carefully over chalk marks and fluttering notes. Behind you, as you reach the far end, the candle nearest the curtain extinguishes again. Nobody says a word. You just note it, fold up your measuring tape, and carry on. You're seated cross-legged now in a cozy corner room filled with overstuffed chairs, floral upholstery, and the kind of heavy drapes that never quite stop smelling like last century. A brass teapot puffs softly on a warmer, and beside it sits a mismatched set of teacups, each one supposedly favored by a different spirit. This is the part of the investigation some ghost hunters call the social hour. Others call it lunacy with snacks. Either way, you're about to learn the fine art of decoding spirit messages through tea leaves and tapping sounds. The room's quiet save for the tick-tick-tick of a carriage clock on the mantel and the occasional clink of porcelain as someone sets down a cup. You're offered a choice of blend elderflower rosehip or haunted Assam. You opt for the Assam. It feels bold, possibly caffeinated. As the tea brews, the medium, an older woman in a green shawl with a tight gray bun and a pin that reads, "Spirit's Welcome," passes out saucers and small teaspoons. "Drink slowly," she says, "but not all the way. Leave just a sip. We need the leaves to settle." You follow her lead. The tea is stronger than expected, a little bitter with a smoky finish, like if Earl Grey had unresolved issues. Once the cups are near empty, the real work begins. Each participant tips their cup slowly over the saucer, swirling it 3 times clockwise while whispering a greeting to those beyond the veil. You consider saying hello aloud, but decide a polite nod to your teacup will do. Your leaves settle into a vaguely fish-shaped pile. Across the room, someone claims to see a bell. Another insists their leaves resemble a raven. One guest has a perfect triangle. Everyone oohs appropriately. The medium leans over your cup and peers in. "Ah," she says slowly, "I see anticipation and a shoe." You look. It does kind of resemble a shoe. "Tread carefully," she adds. "A journey lies ahead, possibly spiritual, possibly across the hall." You smile. This is delightful nonsense. And yet you feel a thrill, not because you believe the shoe will lead you to the beyond, but because you want to play along. That's half the charm of Victorian ghost rituals, the elegant seriousness applied to the deeply whimsical. Historians still argue whether tea leaf reading was a true spiritual art, or just an excuse for genteel women to share gossip in hushed tones while discussing their visions. Either way, it was wildly popular and strangely comforting. As the teacups are cleared away, the tapping begins. At first, you think it's someone shifting in their chair. Then you realize it's far too regular. Tap, 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 pause, tap. Everyone goes still. The medium raises her hand. The table's speaking. You lean forward slightly. The taps seem to come from beneath the table's polished walnut surface. A member pulls out a simple codebook, Morse-like, but adapted for séance etiquette. 1 tap, I kwanching yes. 2, nikwuchken no. 3. Datumon uncertain. 4. Victorian rephrase the question. Someone begins asking, are you someone we know? Tap. Were you here last week? Tap. Tap. Do you like rosehip tea? Tap. The room chuckles. Even the ghost has good taste. Another question, this time from the medium herself. Do you want to be seen? Pause. Then, tap. The group nods solemnly. It's the kind of moment that makes your scalp prickle, even though your brain keeps whispering it's just someone nudging the table leg. But your heart leans in closer. Whitby naturally takes a measurement. He logs the number of seconds between each tap, the strength of the sound, and even the echo's delay. You note it too, but also doodle a tiny ghost peeking out from behind a teacup. He looks smug. The session continues, the room warm with tea and tension. One woman begins sketching the table's spirit signatures, lines that supposedly trace the pattern of vibrations. Another logs emotional impressions. Anxious, melancholy, yearning. You write phenomenon table taps. Responses coherent. Possible intentional rhythm. Notable moment, 1 tap after question about visibility. Atmosphere cozy but oddly electric. Victorians believed that spirits retained emotional residue and that this could be read in their responses. If the taps were slow and heavy, the ghost was sad. If sharp and quick, agitated. If erratic, perhaps confused or a bit playful. Tonight's taps are deliberate. Thoughtful, not frightened, not aggressive. Just present. You're reminded of someone trying to speak in a language they only half remember. The session winds down with a final tap. Then silence. The medium nods and everyone whispers a soft, thank you. Cups are cleared, chairs are shifted, and you're left wondering if you imagined it all. Until you feel a brief tap, just one on the toe of your boot. You glance down. No one's near you. You don't move. You don't speak. You just measure the distance from your chair to the center of the table, exactly 3 feet 7 inches, and add a footnote, unexpected contact. Duration, half second. Origin, uncertain. Possible goodbye. Then you smile to yourself, sip the last of your tea, and note that the room feels warmer now. Or maybe that's just you. You're crouched beside a low table now. Eyes narrowed. Breath held, watching a length of string tug ever so slightly toward the floor. No, it's not a ghost playing cat's cradle. It's a test. You and the ghost club are on the hunt for fraud. Yes, the spirit world is spooky, but tonight is about uncovering a different kind of chill, the kind that comes from catching someone in the act of spiritual stagecraft. You're about to learn that not all ghostly moans are spectral in origin. Some come from Aunt Mildred's stomach, and some are tugged by cleverly placed wires. Tonight's seance is what the group calls a controlled experiment. You're in a borrowed townhouse near Euston, dimly lit and reportedly active. The medium is a new recruit, Mrs. Penrose, a woman with watery eyes and the kind of fragile nervousness that suggests she might jump at her own reflection. She's been claiming powerful visitations lately. One involving a ghost dog, another involving a cousin who speaks only in riddles. And so naturally, Whitby has assembled a control group. You set up the room like a magician setting a trap, furniture placed strategically. Chalk lines drawn under table legs, string tied to hidden bells. A mirror is angled to reflect the space under the table without giving it away. A light dusting of flour coats the floorboards behind the cabinet where the spirits like to materialize. Mrs. Penrose arrives precisely on time, gliding in like a character in a Gothic novel, trailing shawls and softly humming something that sounds like a hymn. Her voice trembles as she greets the room. They're close tonight, she whispers. Very close. The seance begins. Hands are joined. The room darkens. A single candle flickers in the center of the table. Mrs. Penrose breathes deeply, then begins her trance. It doesn't take long. A soft rapping, a sigh, a distinct creak from the cabinet behind her. But you're watching closely. You've got the mirror. And while the others close their eyes and whisper encouragement to the beyond, you're counting seconds and checking for flower disturbance. Then movement. The bell rings. Just once. Gasps around the table. But you saw it, a subtle shifting of Mrs. Penrose's shoulder, a twitch of her foot. You lean over to Whitby and whisper, flower lines broken. He nods grimly. The medium continues now, claiming her cousin Jeffrey is here, demanding to know why the raspberry preserves were removed from the pantry. Historians still argue whether most Victorian mediums were full-on charlatans or simply sensitive people swept up in the spiritualist frenzy of the era. Some started honestly convinced they could hear whispers from the veil, only to later realize a well-timed foot tap earned more gasps than silence ever did. You're handed a small device, a collapsible brass pointer used to test for hidden wires along table edges. As you inspect the underside, you find a faint thread, nearly invisible, connecting one chair leg to the bell. Clever, but not clever enough. The séance ends with a flourish. Mrs. Penrose collapses slightly and says, "He's gone." The room breathes again. You make your way to the chalk marks. 2 are smudged. The cabinet's latch is unfastened. Whitby addresses the room with gentle diplomacy. "There seems to have been intercession," he says. Mrs. Penrose blinks. The spirits were particularly forceful. Whitby smiles, tilts his head, and says nothing. The message is clear. Later, over biscuits and brandy, the group discusses the challenge of maintaining integrity in ghost hunting. "We want to believe," one woman says, "but not at the expense of our reason." Another adds, "It's easy to be fooled when you're desperate to see someone again. You reflect on that. Because it's true." Victorian ghost hunting wasn't just a scientific exercise, it was an emotional one. People had lost siblings, spouses, children. Entire generations were swallowed by war and disease. Spiritualism wasn't about fraud. It was about hope, even when that hope came with stage curtains and pre-rigged bells. Still, the Ghost Club holds its line. There's room for belief, but only if it can survive scrutiny. That's why they carry measuring tape and dusting powder along with their incense. You jot in your notebook, medium. Mrs. Penrose phenomena. Bell ring. Cabinet knock. Verbal channeling. Evidence. Physical manipulation. Confirmed via thread and flower. Conclusion. Inconclusive spirituality. Conclusive slipperiness. You're not disappointed. If anything, you're more convinced that the real hauntings are subtle. The frauds make noise. The genuine ones, if they exist, move like shadows, tilt curtains, and vanish when the light gets too curious. As the session wraps up, Mrs. Penrose offers a parting message from the beyond. They're always watching. You believe her, just maybe not for the reasons she thinks. You're sitting at a grand mahogany desk now, its surface crowded with yellow documents, inkwells, and the faint smell of mildew and pipe smoke. There's a gas lamp burning low nearby, casting a soft amber glow over stacks of paper, so brittle you fear they might sigh if touched too hard. Tonight's investigation doesn't involve cold spots or moving curtains. Instead, you're doing the quietest ghost hunting of all archival research. Most hauntings, Whitby murmurs, adjusting his spectacles as he hunches beside you, leave paper trails. He gestures to a box labeled Poltergeist, Clapham, 1876, 1879, as though it contains the Holy Grail. You lift the lid. Inside are dozens of brittle pages, clippings from local newspapers, handwritten witness accounts, floor plans scrawled with inked arrows and shaky handwriting. Some letters are even addressed to whom it may concern at the Society for Psychical Inquiry, as if the ghosts themselves had requested a formal committee. The goal tonight, to map the patterns of a haunting. If a spirit returns again and again to the same place, or same kind of place, then maybe a pattern reveals itself. And if you can trace that pattern, you can anticipate or intervene. You begin with a newspaper clipping, "Mysterious Clatter at Larkspur Lane, circa 1876. According to the article, the house's occupants heard footsteps in the attic every Thursday, at dusk, followed by what sounded like marbles rolling across the floor. No one was ever found upstairs." The article ends with the line, "Housemaid refuses to dust parlor unless promised divine protection." Next is a census form cross-referenced with the address from the article. A family of 5, a governess, one elderly aunt who passed away in April of that same year. You raise an eyebrow. Whitby points. Note the timing. The haunting begins 2 weeks after her death. You log it carefully. Incident, weekly footsteps. Trigger event, familial death. Location, attic pattern. Thursday evenings. Only possible residual imprint. Historians still argue whether hauntings follow grief geography or pure coincidence. But to the Victorians, records like these were proof. They didn't have EMF meters or spirit boxes, but they had ledgers, and they had curiosity. You dive deeper into the box. One letter details a haunting at a boarding school, always occurring near the west stairwell between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. 3 separate students had sleepwalked into the corridor muttering the same nonsense phrase. Tell her it's still warm. You shiver. The building, it turns out, was once a mill house. The west stairwell had been added over an old chimney flue. Coincidence maybe, but you note it all the same. And so the mapping begins. Whitby brings out a large parchment, an old city map with ghost reports marked in tiny red X's. He adds a new one with a flourish. Hauntings aren't random, he says, tapping the paper. They cluster. He shows you how reports tend to group around certain places: former execution grounds, plague pits, abandoned chapels, and curiously enough, tailors' shops. The Ghost Club still isn't sure why spirits would have an affinity for needlepoint and wool, but it's one of those mysteries they log anyway. You begin to see the appeal. It's one thing to sit in a room waiting for a curtain to twitch. It's another to trace a ghost's footsteps across decades through dusty deeds and expired ledgers. It's slower, quieter, but more intimate. You stumble upon a curious page titled Hauntings Correlated with Wallpaper Replacement. It's a list of domestic disturbances that followed major home renovations. Several people claimed that spirits became more active after wallpaper was stripped or carpets removed. One entry simply reads, "Don't touch the nursery paneling. It doesn't like to be naked." You smile at that. Another log details disturbances in a manor shortly after the owners changed the front door from oak to pine. Knocking increased. Mirrors fogged. The butler resigned. Whitby points out that many of these changes involved disturbing something old, tearing, replacing, shifting. It's less about the objects, he says, and more about the memories stitched into them. You jot a theory. Theory displacement. Monasage activation memory bound to materials, not just place objects. Dondos, ghost containers. As the night wears on, your eyes blur, your fingers smudged with old ink. But you feel like you're assembling a puzzle whose edges are always shifting. Still, piece by piece, some patterns emerge. At one point, Whitby pulls out a fragile vellum folder labeled The Haunted Postcodes. Inside are lists of London districts with statistical charts of reported phenomena. The numbers rise and fall like ghostly tides. Some places spike for a year, then go silent for decades. Others whisper consistently for a century. It makes you wonder what stories lie beneath your own neighborhood, your own street. What names were once shouted from windows that now hold flower boxes. You close the final folder and sit back. Ghosts, you realize, aren't just in rooms. They're in records, in addresses no longer listed, in names forgotten by everyone but the census takers and the few curious enough to read them by candlelight. And as Whitby extinguishes the lamp, you look at your notes. You haven't seen a ghost tonight, but you've followed one. Across years. Through paper. Through lives. And somehow, that feels even more real. You're sitting on the edge of a rickety bed now in a room that smells faintly of lavender, old varnish, and the quiet dread of too many unspoken things. The wallpaper is floral but faded. The window is just wide enough to let in a moan of wind. And the mattress beneath you creaks like it remembers every bad dream ever dreamt here. Welcome to the domain of the Haunted Bedstead Society. Whitby closes the door behind you with a soft click, then gestures to the bed. We believe this particular frame is responsible for no fewer than 6 documented spectral visitations, he says. Most of them uncomfortable. You glance at the iron headboard. It's ornate, almost baroque in its flourishes. The footboard has a curious dent, like someone once kicked it during a particularly vivid nightmare. The mattress is the color of antique bone and covered in a crocheted coverlet you desperately hope has been washed in the last few decades. The Ghost Club has long held that certain pieces of furniture beds mostly act as anchors for residual energy. Places where the human body lingers in stillness, in vulnerability, and sometimes in death. Beds, after all, are where we dream, where we weep, where we wait. Historians still argue whether haunted objects store emotional energy or simply attract superstition. But the Haunted Bedstead Society took things to the next level. They documented, measured, even slept in beds with reported supernatural activity to compare results. You look around the room. A thin rope has been tied between 2 chairs at either side of the bed, just taut enough that if someone or something shifts the mattress in the night, the rope will twitch and ring a tiny silver bell. Next to the bell, a folded note card labeled, "In the event of stirring, please document position and timestamp with utmost care. Tonight, you're the designated bed watcher, not sleeper observer." You perch in an adjacent chair armed with a measuring tape, a ledger, and a mug of something herbal that tastes like steeped bark. The room is still safe for the occasional groan of wood and the tick-tick-tick of a pocket watch left on the nightstand. The ghost, if it comes, is said to be that of a governess named Elsie, who died in this very bed during an influenza outbreak. Rumor says she appears only when someone lies atop the covers fully clothed with a book in hand and a sense of regret in their heart. You're halfway there. One of the other investigators volunteers to play the role of Elsie's stand-in. He lies down carefully on the bed, adjusts his waistcoat, opens a leather-bound copy of Middlemarch, and pretends to read. You try not to smirk. The minutes pass. Then an hour. Nothing. Then the bell tinkles. Just once. Everyone freezes. The reader sits up. Wasn't me. You check the rope. Still taut. You take a measurement. The bed frame has shifted less than an inch to the right. But it has shifted. You scribble furiously. Incident bell ring. Measurement 0.75. Shift eastward. No observable movement by participant. Possible floorboard warping. Paranormal influence. Someone passing gas. You check the chalk marks under the bedposts. One is slightly smudged. You note that too. As the night wears on, the ghostly tension ebbs and flows like sleep trying to catch hold. The reader eventually dozes off and you sit in your chair staring at the bed like it's about to confess something. And maybe it does, just not in words. The room feels heavy, not dangerous, just full. You check the measurements again. No change. The bell is still, but the air has shifted. A faint floral scent wafts through the room, one that wasn't there before. Not lavender, not mothballs, something older. Roses steeped in ink and memory. You note it. Later, you run your fingers along the carved edge of the headboard. It's been touched thousands of times, gripped during illness, sleep, grief, ecstasy, and, finally, death. You think, if anything holds a spiritual echo, it's this. Whitby returns quietly and checks your notes. Excellent form, he says. You're natural with a bedsheet haunting. He shows you older records, another bedstead in Gloucestershire, where a pillow was observed to deflate visibly over 2 nights without being touched. Another in Kent, where a stuffed fox kept at the footboard was found upside down every morning, despite being secured with twine. Poltergeists, he explains, tend to have a flair for the absurd. You look again at the bell. Still, silent. But the air seems to hold its breath. You measure one last time. The bed hasn't moved, but you're sure something in this room has. As you pack up the rope, fold the ledger, and douse the oil lamp, you feel a brush of cool air across your back. Not a chill. More like a sigh. Elsie perhaps returning to sleep. You whisper thank you into the darkness and quietly shut the door behind you. You're crouched, once again, on a wooden floor this time, in an airy drawing room that's been hastily transformed into a kind of makeshift observation lab. The hearth is cold. The curtains hang still. And, in the center of it all, stands a marble bust of Queen Victoria that seems to be staring at you. That says Whitby, pointing a gloved finger, moved yesterday. Turned 20 degrees to the left. You raise an eyebrow. By itself, Whitby nods, solemn as a bishop. We marked the plinth. It definitely shifted. You squint. There's a fine chalk line drawn around the base of the bust. A subtle wedge of air exists between chalk and marble on the left side. No more than a breath, really. But it's there. You begin your measurements. First, the distance from bust to fireplace, exactly 5 feet 2 inches. Then, bust to curtain hem, 3 feet 6 inches. Finally, bust to nearest creaky floorboard, which you note is warped just enough to squeak whenever someone steps on it. You test this by stepping. Creak. No ghost yet, but the floor clearly has opinions. This is how the Victorian ghost hunters do it. No movement too small to record, no shadow too subtle to ignore. And today's focus is particularly finicky fabric, movement, drafts, perception. They call it the curtain effect. The theory is this: spirits move the air, not always objects. A flutter, a ripple, a soft fold where none should be. The Victorians became amateur physicists in their obsession with drapery. One journal entry Whitby shows you is titled, "On the Unnatural Billowing of Velvet Panels in Windless Chambers." You walk to the curtain and press your palm against it. Cold, but not damp. You pull out your tape and measure from the curtain edge to the floor 6 inches exactly. The fringe is soft woolen. The pattern is paisley, which feels inherently haunted. Then it happens. Just as you're leaning in, the edge of the curtain lifts gently, subtly. It doesn't flap or jump. It simply curls upward as if reacting to something invisible brushing past. You freeze. Everyone in the room turns at once. Whitby raises a thermometer. Temperature drop, he murmurs. 2 degrees in the last 60 seconds. You check the window. Closed tight. Someone lights a match to check airflow. The flame bends away from the curtain. One of the women gasps. It's drawn to the bust. Indeed, the curl of the curtain seems to reach, not flutter, toward Queen Victoria's marble nose. Historians still argue whether these movements are subconscious drafts created by body heat and old stone, or whether ghosts really do express themselves through billowy gestures. The Victorians naturally believed in both science and spirits. The soul, they argued, might very well drift like smoke, and what's more poetic than a ghost who chooses silk over screams? Whitby gently anchors the curtain with a silver paperweight, shaped like a toad. Let's see if it lifts again, he says. You go back to measuring. This time the bust has moved again. Only a hair. But the change is real. Incident curtain curl toward bust. Bust rotation 3 degrees. Clockwise. Airflow inconsistent. Source unclear. Hypothesis: presence attracted to statuary. Or allergic to paisley. You log it all, resisting the temptation to doodle little Victorian ghosts in fashionable crinolines. A theory emerges among the group. Perhaps spirits aren't trying to communicate directly. Perhaps they're just passing by, brushing the material world like leaves rustling as they walk through an overgrown garden. The curtain isn't their message. It's their footprint. Another experiment begins. A clean sheet is tacked lightly to the curtain rod. The idea, if it lifts or folds, they'll be able to see the creases. You stand back, sip lukewarm tea, and wait. After 10 minutes, the sheet lifts in the middle. Just slightly. But it rises, holds for a breath, then settles. A draft. You check the nearest thermometer, still stable. Someone whispers. They like to be noticed. You take another note, then measure from the curtain's corner to the wall. It's unchanged. Yet the memory of the movement feels fresh, as if the air itself now holds its breath. You find yourself wondering if maybe the ghosts aren't trying to be terrifying. Maybe they just want their presence registered. A ripple in fabric. A shift in a statue. Proof that they were for a moment there. As the session ends, the paperweight remains still. The curtain does not move again. But when you walk by the bust on your way out, you notice her gaze just slightly feels different. As if she's been watching you. You take one last measurement, then pause just for a second to nod to Her Majesty. Because even ghosts deserve a little courtesy. You're winding a pocket watch now, its tiny mechanical heart ticking steadily in your hand. The time is just shy of midnight, and the air in the hallway is unusually still, as if the whole house is holding its breath. Around you, a semicircle of curious onlookers waits silently, all eyes fixed on the old mantel clock above the fireplace. It doesn't tick. That's the point. Tonight's investigation is centered around one of the most persistent and quietly chilling beliefs in Victorian ghost lore, that clocks stop at the moment of death. Sometimes just one clock. Sometimes every timepiece in the house. And if a clock restarts itself unprompted, well, that's a whole other kind of conversation. You step closer to the mantel. The clock is heavy, carved from black slate, with gold filigree and a brass keyhole near its base. You gently open the back panel. The mechanism is intact, but has been wound tight for decades. Whitby insists the previous owners refused to reset it after their father died in that very room. The family claimed the hands froze at 3:47 a.m., the exact time of his passing. You check your watch again, 11:56 p.m. Tonight, the Ghost Club plans to test the superstition. You've brought 3 mechanical clocks, each placed in different rooms. One has been deliberately wound backward. One hasn't been wound at all. And one, this one, is the control. All 3 are set to the same time. Your job is to monitor the main clock, record any changes, and should something peculiar occur, measure the position of the hands to the minute. Victorians had a peculiar reverence for timekeeping. Clocks weren't just machines. They were symbols of order, life's rhythm, even mortality. And when a clock stopped, especially without cause, it was often interpreted as a sign that the veil had thinned, that something or someone had passed through. Historians still argue whether such stories stem from the grief-shrouded perceptions of the bereaved, or from coincidental mechanical failure. But in a world where precision and routine were sacred, a clock halting itself felt spiritual. You take a seat near the hearth and log the current status. Mantle. Clock current. Time 11:59 p.m. Movement stable. Sound none non-functional. Note winding mechanism tight but untouched. The other clocks are being watched by fellow club members. One is near the pantry. One sits beside the foot of the infamous haunted bed. You radio in your time check. All clocks match. Now you wait. The gas lights are dimmed. The room fills with the faint scent of beeswax and old coal dust. You hear nothing but the whisper of cloth as someone shifts in their chair and the low ticking of your personal pocket watch. Then, the temperature dips. Not drastically, just enough that you notice your fingers feel a touch colder against the brass rim of the clock case. You glance at the thermometer by the mantel. 2 degrees lower. A coincidence. You lean in. The air around the clock feels thicker, like someone has exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. Then, without a sound, the minute hand shifts forward. Only once. 2, exactly midnight. You blink. You glance at your pocket watch. Still 1 minute behind. You feel your pulse quicken, but your hands remain steady as you write. Event minute hand. Advanced 1 tick at 11:59 pocket time. Observed directly. Note surrounding air cooler, no external vibration. Other clock status pending. You alert the others. Moments later, the pantry clock reports no change. The bedroom clock, however, has stopped completely frozen at midnight. A hush falls over the entire group. Whitby enters, walking slowly quietly. He examines the mantel clock, sees the shifted hand, and gives a slight, almost proud nod. Not uncommon, he whispers, especially when the room feels remembered. He doesn't explain that phrase. Instead, he produces a small tape measure and checks the distance between the clock face and the wall. No movement. No signs of tampering. The silence around the clock is more than acoustic, it's thick. Like you've stepped inside a snow globe and someone just stopped shaking it. You close your eyes for a moment and try to remember what the room felt like just minutes before. And you realize it's not just colder, it's emptier. As if something that had been present is now gone. You reopen your notebook. Theory. Possibility of linked moment. Clocks react to something unseen. Emotional residue. Shared atmospheric impulse. Clock did not start ticking, hand moved, but remained still. You lean back in your chair. Nothing else moves. But when the session ends and you prepare to leave the room, you hear a tiny tick. One single click of the mechanism. Not the start of a rhythm, just a reminder. As if the clock is saying, I'm still watching too. You leave the room, quietly measuring tape still in hand, and don't bother trying to restart the mantel clock. It's done enough. You're sitting cross-legged on a cold stone floor surrounded by tins of shortbread tarnished silverware and a rolling pin that might have been used for both pastry and paranormal activity. This isn't the glamorous side of ghost hunting. This is the pantry. Specifically the pantry of a manor rumored to be haunted not by footsteps or sobs, but by rearranged cutlery. This one's a doozy, Whitby says, holding up a teacup with a suspicious chip. Poltergeist behavior. Subtle but persistent. The sugar tongs never stay put. You're skeptical until you see the notes. The logs go back over a year. Forks found in the flour tin. Ladles hung from the window latch. A butter knife discovered inside a box of oatcakes, blade-up handle buried. Each item returned to its place only to be found somewhere absurd the following morning. Historians still argue whether these incidents were caused by bored servants, sleepwalking children, or perhaps one highly eccentric house cat. But for the Ghost Club, this pantry is prime spiritual territory. Tonight, you're staying the night. Alone. With the spoons. The rules are simple: catalog every object in the pantry. Place them in known logged positions. Then sit in the dark and wait. So you do. Your measuring tape stretches across shelves and countertops. Every fork gets its own tally mark. The pickle forks, of which there are an alarming number, are lined up precisely 1 inch apart. You tape a grid onto the floor like a crime scene and photograph each setup with Whitby's charmingly bulky box camera. Then the lantern is extinguished. You sit, you wait. At first nothing, then clink. It's soft, distant. Could be a settling shelf. Could be your imagination. But then another clink. Louder. Near the spice rack. You hold your breath. Oh, there it is again. You relight the lantern with shaking fingers and scan the shelves. Everything looks normal. But then you spot it. The sugar tongs. They've moved 2 inches to the left. You're sure of it. You check the measuring tape. Your chalk line now sits beneath thin air. The tongs have migrated. No one else is in the room. You note it. Phenomenon object displacement. Sugar tongs shifted. 2. Left. No observed cause. You return to darkness. Half an hour later, a soft rustle. You hear the unmistakable clink of silverware brushing against tin. This time, you don't light the lantern. You just listen. You think you hear breathing. Not your own. You sit frozen heart, thudding in your chest like an overexcited metronome. Then thud. Something falls from the countertop. You light the lantern again. It's a single spoon, lying belly up on the stone floor. You pick it up carefully. It's warm. You log it, spoon event. 12:57 a.m. Fell from shelf despite stable placement. Temperature slightly elevated. Emotion rattled but fascinated. You decide to speak aloud softly. Do you want something? No reply, but the flower tin shifts. Just enough to creak. You don't go near it. Instead, you whisper, "Thank you for the demonstration." It's an absurd thing to say to a pantry, and yet it feels appropriate. You settle back down cross-legged again, more alert than ever. You place a single spoon at the center of your chalk grid and stare at it. 10 minutes pass, then 20. The spoon twitches. Just once. You don't move. You don't breathe. You just measure the distance between it and the line. 3/4 of an inch. You write spoon twitch. 1:21 a.m. Possible interaction. Presence playful or annoyed. Unclear. You stay there for 2 more hours. By the time dawn begins to pale the edges of the windows, the tongs have returned to their original place, as if nothing ever happened. The spoon is upright in your cup. A single fork now sits on the windowsill, perfectly balanced. And you feel like you've had a conversation without words. As you pack up your notebook and wind your tape measure for the 100th time, you whisper a quiet goodbye. And just as you leave, something knocks gently against the inside of the flour tin. You don't open it. Some pantry mysteries, after all, deserve their privacy. You're crouched at the top of a narrow staircase, now peering into a cellar that smells of dust candle wax and something distinctly feline. Beside you, a long-haired tabby cat named Thistle flicks her tail and refuses to go another step. That apparently is significant. Animals, especially cats and dogs, were the unofficial early warning systems of Victorian ghost hunters. And tonight, you're about to learn why. Thistle has been part of the household for nearly 12 years. Normally fearless, she naps beside chimneys, pounces at moths, and once slapped a visitor for wearing too much lavender. But since last week, she refuses to enter the south-facing cellar, and she stares a lot at a blank spot on the wall. So naturally, the ghost club is intrigued. Animals are sensitive, Whitby says, rubbing his chin. They respond to shifts in pressure, in tone, in atmosphere. Or you think maybe they just don't like spiders. Still, you're here to test the theory. You descend the creaking stairs, slowly, lantern in one hand, notebook in the other. Thistle sits at the top like a disapproving librarian. Her pupils are huge. The cellar is cool, not cold. Dry stone walls, wine racks, a few dusty crates labeled "Fancy Candles Do Not Tip." You place a blanket on the ground and sit cross-legged. No movement, no sounds. You begin to log the basics, then scratch. It's faint but real. You glance toward the far wall. Nothing there. Then it happens again, and this time, Thistle hisses from upstairs. She's still staring at that spot on the wall. You shine your lantern across it. Just stone. You measure 7 feet across 5 feet high. No unusual markings. You run your hand over the surface. Smooth. Cold. Still your skin prickles. The Victorian belief in animal sensitivity wasn't just superstition, it was doctrine. Dogs barked at empty corners. Birds fluttered at unseen winds, and cats. Well, cats stared into oblivion like professionals. Historians still debate whether this was a cultural holdover from pre-Christian animism or just plain old pet owner confirmation bias. But even skeptics admit animals do strange things, especially in strange places. You leave a saucer of milk at the base of the wall. An offering. A test. You're not sure. You just want to see what happens. 10 minutes pass, then 20. The milk ripples, no footsteps, no vibration, but it ripples like something exhaled against its surface. You jot it down. Phenomenon: milk movement. Temperature: stable. Surrounding air: still. Animal reaction: sustained refusal to enter. You head back up the stairs slowly. Thistle is now sitting on the third step, body rigid. Her ears are flat. She watches you, like you might not be entirely you anymore. You whisper, "You saw something, didn't you?" She blinks. Once. Later that night, the Ghost Club sets up a passive animal test. 2 cats, including Thistle, and 1 excitable spaniel named Ginger Snap, are brought into various parts of the house. Every room gets a few minutes of observation. In most, the animals are fine, but when they're led toward the cellar, all 3 stop cold. Ginger Snap whines. Thistle bolts. The third cat, Percival, arches his back, hisses once, and hides behind a cabinet. Whitby logs it carefully. Animal consensus, he declares. You feel validated and slightly uneasy. They say ghosts don't need doors, and animals perhaps don't need explanations. One of the women shares a story her grandmother's cat used to curl up each night in the same corner of the sitting room. Always that spot. One night during a family séance, the cat growled at nothing, and from then on, it never entered the room again. The grandmother died the following week. The cat lived to be 21 and avoided that corner until the end. You don't know what to make of that, but you believe it. Back in your room, you review your notes, measuring tape neatly curled beside you. The cellar measurements are precise. The temperature never dropped. The milk dish remained untouched, but not unmoved. And the cat. She still won't come near you. Just for tonight, you leave the door to your room open, just in case someone or something wants to wander by. You're leaning on a banister now, one hand gripping a notepad, the other shading your eyes from the warm, flickering glow of a gas sconce. Across the room, another gaslight flares gently, then dims. Behind you, someone clicks on a candle lantern. Tonight's experiment comparing hauntings under gaslight versus candlelight. Because if there's one thing Victorian ghost hunters truly believed, it's that spirits have a lighting preference. You wouldn't think ghosts would be fussy about ambiance, but, according to Whitby's compiled notes, more than 70% of reported visual apparitions in the 1870s occurred under candlelight, with a strong drop-off once gas fixtures became popular. Coincidence, a shift in housing infrastructure, or perhaps spectral stage lighting. You're here to test it. The room has been split down the middle. On the left, gas lights. Hissing softly, steady yellow glow, no flicker unless the pressure dips. On the right, candles. Unsteady, waxy, warm, and wavering. Shadows rise and fall like dancers behind a curtain. It's a theatrical setup, and the ghosts, you hope, appreciate the effort. Whitby calls this the twin flame method. You'll be watching for motion shadow play, temperature dips, and, if you're lucky, visual anomalies. One chair has been placed directly at the border of the 2 lighting zones. A straw-filled dummy wearing a Victorian nightgown sits in it. Her name naturally is Mildred. You begin with the gaslight side. The light is clean, predictable. The shadows fall into neat wedges. Your thermometer shows no change. The candles, however, tell a different story. On that side of the room, everything flickers. The corners seem to deepen. The dummy's shadow appears to move every few seconds, elongating, bending briefly, doubling before fading. It's a lighting illusion, surely. Surely. You measure the distance from the candle base to the dummy's toe. 2 feet exactly. You check the floorboards for slope minimal. The wax from the candle is already beginning to pool. Then a flutter. The curtain on the candlelit side lifts. Only slightly. Enough to whisper upward, then fall again. You glance at the gaslight side. Nothing. Candles. 1. Gaslights. 0. Historians still argue whether flickering light encourages hallucination or simply enhances visual suggestion. The Victorians didn't mind. They believed candlelight softened the boundary between worlds. Gaslight, meanwhile, was considered too modern, too industrial, too alive. You jot down your thoughts. Observation: candlelit corner shows shadow movement. Curtain flutter observed only on candle side. Gaslight side, static, no anomalies. Dummy mood, unreadable. Someone dims the gaslight slightly, just to test. The result: nothing. The room feels cleaner, less permeable, but when one of the candles flickers nearly out, then reignites in a curl of smoke. Several group members gasp. That's when you see it. A shape brief thin curling, like vapor moves across the candle wall. You can't tell if it's smoke or shadow or something else, but it moves from right to left just behind Mildred's straw-stuffed head. You step closer. The shape's gone, but your skin prickles with recognition. You measure the distance from the curtain rod to the shadow's endpoint. Just over 4 feet. Noted. You take a second reading from the chair leg to the candle unchanged, but you swear Mildred's head is now tilted slightly. Whitby enters with a teacup and glances at the setup. Ah, he says, nodding at the dummy. Did she shift? You say nothing. He smiles. Candlelight prefers drama. The session continues. The candle flames bend and recover. The gaslights hum, indifferent. Someone places a bell near the baseboard under the candle wall. A few moments later, it rings softly. Once. You don't bother testing the gaslight side. You already know what you'll find. The group eventually dims both sides. For a few minutes, the room is nearly dark. The dummy glows faintly in silhouette, half in shadow, half in mystery. It's beautiful in its own unsettling way. You take one final measurement before the session ends. The dummy has shifted 5 inches toward the candlelight. Whether pulled by draft, tilt, or invitation, you can't say. But you log it. Conclusion. Spirits prefer flicker, or at least they dislike stability. Perhaps they want to be glimpsed, never seen. As you pack up your tools, you notice one candle still burns with a long, elegant flame. You lean in to extinguish it, but just before you do, the flame leans away from you, ever so slightly. You stare. Then, you exhale and blow it out. The darkness that follows feels watched. You're kneeling beside an ornate side table now, carefully tracing a perfect rectangle on the carpet with your measuring tape. It encircles a dusty silver picture frame, an antique pocket watch, and a lace-trimmed handkerchief folded into a triangle. This is what the Ghost Club calls a spirit zone. The theory, according to Whitby, is that spirits don't haunt entire rooms, they cling to objects. Places are incidental. It's the things, buttons, locks, jewelry, even old receipts that remember. And when those things are disturbed or moved, the spirits respond. Think of it as turf, he says, holding a brass compass with unshakable authority. They claim it. They don't like to share. Tonight, you're experimenting with boundaries. Specifically, whether spirits can be measured not just by presence, but by perimeter. You place the measuring tape around the trio of objects, laying it down like a crime scene outline. The handkerchief, allegedly, once owned by a woman named Letty, who died of melancholy in 1861, was said to appear in different parts of the house during periods of high emotional tension. Once on a windowsill, once on the bread plate. Tonight, it sits precisely at the center of your square. You record your grid coordinates. Frame southeast corner. Watch north edge. 4.25 inches from center handkerchief center axis. Then, you step back. The Ghost Club believes that spirits like cats dislike crossing drawn boundaries. They linger along the edges, test limits, and if moved, sometimes retaliate with flickering lights or shifted curtains. But sometimes they stay still, waiting to be acknowledged. You sit in a straight-backed chair, nearby lantern-dimmed eyes fixed on the spirit zone. The room is hushed. Even the fire seems to crackle a little quieter. 5 minutes pass. Then 10. Then a tap. Soft. Delicate. Like a fingernail against glass. You lean forward. The pocket watch chain has moved. You're certain. It's no longer curled, one link now rests outside the grid. You take out your ruler. A shift of exactly 1.5 inches. Event watch chain displacement. Time 11:08 p.m. Direction northeast over perimeter. Notes. No vibration. No draft. Emotion, cautious intrigue. You reset the chain carefully inside the zone. The handkerchief remains still. The room grows colder. You glance at your thermometer 3 degrees lower than 20 minutes ago. Then the picture frame begins to tilt. Not fall. Just tilt. You don't blink. You don't move. Then it tilts back. Whitby enters, nodding at the scene. They're testing the fence, he says. Some ghosts, they like games. Historians still argue whether this method is scientific curiosity or psychological theater. But the Victorians believed it helped spirits focus their energy, like creating a runway for memory. Another member tries a variation. She replaces the picture frame with a comb once used by her grandmother. Nothing happens for 10 minutes. Then the handkerchief lifts at one corner just an inch, then drops. Interaction handkerchief flutter. Object substitution confirmed result. Conclusion: object associations may influence activity. You begin to notice a pattern. When objects are familiar when they carry meaning, the spirit zone seems to hum quietly but perceptibly. When the objects are generic random items from a drawer, nothing happens. Spirits apparently aren't interested in things they never knew. You decide to break the boundary, just one corner. You nudge the measuring tape out of alignment, letting the eastern edge curve outward. The moment you do, the picture frame slides half an inch to the left. Everyone sees it. You remeasure. The movement is precise. No one speaks. Even Whitby seems a little pale. You quickly return the tape to its original square. The frame does not move again. You breathe in, then out. Then, for reasons you can't explain, you whisper, "Apologies." The air feels lighter. The temperature rises. Later, when the objects are cleared and the tape rolled up, Whitby offers you a small brass medallion. "Try setting your own perimeter sometime," he says. "Just be polite." They like that. You nod quietly, because now you believe it too. Spirits may not want to hurt you. They just want their corners respected. You're sitting at an oak writing desk, now staring at a peculiar contraption made of brass wood and barely restrained optimism. It looks like a cross between a typewriter, a phonograph, and a mousetrap. This, according to Whitby, is a spirit communicator, one of several curious inventions from the height of the Victorian spiritualist boom. It's called the etherograph. You place your hands gently near the keyboard. It's not meant for you to type. It's meant to let the spirits type through you. Tonight's session is dedicated to spiritual technology devices and mechanisms built to bridge the gap between the living and the departed. Not out of whimsy, but out of determined steam-powered sincerity. Whitby explains. The Victorians weren't content to just knock and listen. They wanted dialogue, correspondence, preferably formatted in 12-point cursive. You glance at the mechanism. It's been fitted with a paper roll not unlike a player piano's. If the keys move without human touch, the letters are recorded and translated later. Across the room sits another contraption, the whistling box. Its purpose to emit high-pitched tones whenever residual spectral energy is detected nearby. Currently, it sounds like a kettle preparing for a polite scream. Then there's the infamous noisy chair, a rickety seat fitted with pressure pads, metal springs, and a bell under the cushion. If anything or anyone sits, shifts, or even breathes nearby, it lets you know. You're told the noisy chair rang 4 times last week. Once while empty. The etherograph sputters suddenly. You jump. A single key depresses with a soft click. The letter L. You lean closer. Nothing else happens. 5 minutes pass, then click. Another letter. E. You jot the sequence message fragment. L. E. Is it a name, a warning, or just a faulty spring? Historians still argue whether spirit writing machines produced genuine communications or merely captured the subconscious tremors of hopeful believers. Still, some of the messages remain famous. One claimed to be from Isaac Newton, another from Cleopatra. A third simply read, "Stop measuring everything." You check the etherograph again. It's silent now. Still. You tap the paper roll gently, and the machine lets out a wheeze that sounds almost annoyed. Across the room, the noisy chair creaks. No one is near it. You walk over, slowly measuring tape in hand. From the chair leg to the nearby rug, exactly 31 inches. Unchanged since earlier. But the cushion is indented. You press a finger to the seat. Warm. You step back. Another key on the etherograph clicks. S. Now you have LES. Whitby peeks over your shoulder. Could be Leslie. He muses. Or less. Or just a very distracted ghost learning how to spell. You smile, but your hands are cold. Another member begins experimenting with a talking trumpet, a long conical tube once believed to amplify spiritual whispers. She holds it to her ear, tilts her head, and after a long pause, says, "I heard something like snoring or bees." Whitby logs it as ambiguous, droning, undetermined origin. Back at the desk, the etherograph delivers its 4th letter, S. Now the message reads LESS. You wait. But nothing follows. Noisy chair is quiet. Whistling box is dormant. Even the candle flames have steadied. You log it. Message less. Possible intent uncertain. Environmental factors stable. Emotional response heightened anticipation with mild existential undertones. You power down the etherograph. As you do, the final key depresses. A spacebar. The machine clicks softly and then falls silent. Whitby leans over and whispers, "Perhaps they're trying to tell us something." You nod, unsure what that something is, but it lingers. That word, less. Less noise. Less fear. Less certainty. Or maybe just a reminder. In this world of measuring tapes and bells of dummy heads and spectral seat warmers of people trying to reach across time with brass and twine, maybe, just maybe, the ghosts want less spectacle and more listening. You pack up the etherograph with care, measuring the cable coils as you go. One final note in your log, spirits. Engaged with machine message incomplete but impactful. Recommendation: consider stillness as a valid investigative method. The candle dims. You don't relight it. Sometimes the message gets through best in the quiet. You're gripping a brass doorknob now, a round, slightly tarnished sphere that feels unusually cold even by Victorian manor standards. The room behind it is supposed to be empty. You were just in there. You know this, but now the knob jiggles. Just once. Not enough to open, but enough to make your skin crawl with the slow creeping sensation that someone is trying to get back in. You freeze, measuring tape in one hand, notebook in the other. You glance down. The chalk line drawn earlier around the base of the doorframe remains untouched. The tape you strung across the threshold, tied taut and low like a polite tripwire, hasn't shifted. But that doorknob, it moved. You mark the time, 12:42 a.m. This, Whitby says, is a classic door jiggle haunting. Most people laugh when they hear the term, until the doorknob turns on its own. Then they stop laughing. Victorians documented dozens of cases like this. Reports of locked doors that unlocked themselves. Latches that clicked open during prayers. Cabinet knobs that rattled like someone on the other side had urgent business and no fingers. Historians still argue whether these incidents were due to loose hardware temperature contraction or spiritual manifestations of frustration. You decide to test all three. First, temperature. You measure the surface of the knob with a touch-sensitive thermometer. The room is 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The knob 52. That's a 9-degree difference, more than enough to rule out your own residual body heat. You record it carefully. Then you retighten the knob's mounting screws just in case. You even dust the latch assembly with a fine line of flour to catch any future movement. Then you wait. Across the hallway, another doorknob twitches. You snap your gaze to it. This one is attached to a linen closet. No one's inside. Whitby walks over, silent as ever, and places a simple copper bell atop the knob. Let's see if they're polite enough to knock next time, he says. You laugh. Quietly. Then the bell rings. No delay. No build-up. Just a crisp ting like someone flicked it gently with an invisible nail. The knob turns halfway, then stops. Everyone stares. You measure the angle of the turn. 12 degrees clockwise. The distance from the knob to the wall, 6 inches exactly unchanged. You check the flower under the door. Undisturbed. Whatever's trying to enter or exit doesn't use its feet. You log it. Event: doorknob rotation, linen closet, 12 degrees. Bell triggered. Temperature, 50 degree Ah. No physical entry observed. Floor, no disturbance. This is where things get truly eerie. You open the linen closet, half expecting to find a prankster or raccoon. Nothing. Just shelves, folded blankets, lavender sachets, and the faintest smell of matches. You measure the knob on the inside. It's the same. Cold. Very cold. The bolt assembly is clean. The latch spring responds normally to pressure, but the door doesn't creak as it closes behind you. It clicks. By itself. From the inside. You're locked in. You blink in the darkness. It's warm. Still. Smells like dust and memory. You whisper, "Hello." Something rustles. Just the blankets shifting. Probably. You tap 3 times against the door. Nothing. Then, 3 taps back. You scramble for your tape measure and record the space between your knuckles and the back of the door. 2.5 inches. Your heartbeat sounds louder than your pencil strokes. Eventually, Whitby unlocks the door from the other side, humming some obscure hymn under his breath. "You're lucky," he says. "Last time we couldn't open it for 37 minutes. You check the bell atop the doorknob. It's been turned upside down, not fallen. Turned. You flip it back and nod toward the door. So Whitby shrugs. Some spirits like to test boundaries. Others just enjoy inconveniencing the living. You add a new heading to your log: Spectral Mischief Architectural Edition. The Ghost Club continues testing every knob and latch in the manor. They find that the west wing doors rattle more during rainstorms, while the east parlor knob shifts only at 3:17 a.m. You map each one, sketching outlines, noting temperature shifts, calculating angles like you're drafting a blueprint for ghosts. You begin to wonder if spirits aren't just passing through, they're trying to enter. Not the house, but conversation. Maybe a jiggle is their way of knocking. Maybe they want to be invited in. Or maybe they just really miss blankets. You log your last note of the night: conclusion: spectral communication via doorknob movement plausible, intent ambiguous, persistent, possibly bored. Recommendation: next time leave the door open. Just not the linen closet. You're not going back in there anytime soon. You're perched now in the dusty corner of a long-forgotten library, its shelves sagging under the weight of leather-bound tomes smelling of mothballs and forgotten secrets. The afternoon light slants through stained glass windows, painting the room in shades of amber and deep crimson. Tonight, the investigation is into whispers, soft, inexplicable voices caught by the Victorian ghost hunters on tape and reported by witnesses. Whitby leans close, his breath misting in the cool air. Whispers are among the most frustrating phenomena, he murmurs. They tease the ear, suggest meaning, but vanish before full understanding. You settle into a plush armchair and pull out a small notebook. The library has a peculiar reputation. Multiple guests have reported hearing their names whispered softly, sometimes in languages unknown, sometimes in distinctly English tones. Sometimes the whispers are warnings, other times mere fragments of conversation. No one has ever caught a full message. Historians still argue whether these whispers were real or products of suggestion, but the Victorians insisted on documenting them with patient, methodical care. You hold a small recorder, primitive by modern standards, but state-of-the-art for the time. It's a wax cylinder phonograph designed to capture faint sounds. The idea is to let the spirits speak in their own time, in their own way. You begin by pacing the library, moving slowly between the rows. The wax cylinder spins, catching the ambient sounds. The soft rustle of pages, distant creaks, the faint drip of water somewhere in the cellar. Then, just as you pause by an ancient oak desk, you hear it, a soft hiss, almost like a sigh or a breath. You hold perfectly still. The recorder picks it up. You mark the time, 3:17 p.m. The group listens back to the recording. The hiss is barely audible, more suggestion than sound, yet it sends a chill down everyone's spine. You note it. Phenomenon: faint, hiss, indistinct whisper. Location: library, oak desk. Time: 3:17 p.m. Emotional effect: subtle unease. The whisper theory, as some called it, suggested that spirits preferred to communicate in fragments, leaving just enough to spark curiosity, but never fully revealing themselves, like a conversation half remembered upon waking. To test this, the team attempts a series of questions, speaking softly into the quiet space. Are you here? What do you want? Do you mean harm? No answers. But the room feels different, heavier, quieter, expectant. One member brings out a tuning fork, striking it gently. The note vibrates. You feel it in your chest. Then a faint echo seems to respond, a slight vibration against the bookshelves. You lean forward, measuring the distance between the fork and the nearest shelf. Exactly 4 feet 3 inches. Whitby whispers. Some believe spirits manipulate sound waves to communicate just out of reach of the conscious ear. You agree cautiously. As the sun sets and the room darkens, the whispers seem to grow louder in your mind, even if not in reality. They tug at memory, at imagination. You scribble a final note, whispers elusive but persistent, possibly projections of the mind, or faint spectral echoes. You leave the library feeling the weight of unspoken words and the gentle power of silence itself. You're standing now in a narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper patterned in roses and ivy, the scent of old wood and dust thick in the air. It's late. The gas lamps cast long, trembling shadows, and the floorboards creak softly underfoot as you pace slowly with your measuring tape in hand. Tonight's focus: footsteps. Not just any footsteps, but those inexplicable solitary sounds that echo through empty corridors in Victorian houses, unsettling guests and keeping ghost hunters alert. Whitby explains that footsteps are among the most common hauntings reported, yet also the most ambiguous. They can be caused by drafts animals or nervous humans, but sometimes they seem to have no origin. You move carefully, measuring the length of the hallway 28 feet and 6 inches. You mark the positions of old rugs and loose floorboards. The theory is that the ghostly footsteps often follow specific patterns, repeated routes that reflect unfinished business or emotional attachment. The footsteps can be light or heavy-paced, or erratic, distant, or surprisingly close. Historians still argue whether these sounds were genuinely supernatural or misinterpreted natural noises amplified by anxiety. The Victorians, with their fondness for both science and séance, kept meticulous notes and logs. As you walk back and forth, Whitby sets up a rudimentary footstep trap, a thin layer of flour dusted on a wooden plank in the corridor. The idea is to catch physical traces, evidence of material interaction. Minutes pass. A soft tapping begins. You stop. The sound is rhythmic. Not the creak of a settling house, not the scamper of a rat. It's deliberate. You glance at the flour. No marks. You mark the time 1:17 a.m. Suddenly, a thud echoes from the stairwell above. You look up. Nothing visible. You move to the flour again. Still no prints. Whitby shrugs. Footsteps without footprints, he says, are the most unsettling. They're heard, but not seen, like whispers carried on the wind. You note this with a shiver. The sound continues upstairs, down the hall, then abruptly stops. You decide to recreate the steps yourself, matching the rhythm and cadence you heard. You measure your pace 28 inches per step and note that the phantom footsteps are lighter than yours. They seem to hover just above the floor. A sudden cold draft sweeps the hallway. Your hair lifts. You glance toward the stairwell. The ghostly footsteps resume, closer, faster, then fading again. You record everything meticulously. Phenomenon: footstep sounds. Rhythmic: no physical prints. Location: main hallway and stairwell. Time: 1:17 Halvich 1:25 a.m. Temperature: slight drop during events. You close your notebook with a sigh. Footsteps you think are the most human of hauntings. They mark presence without form. Like a sigh in a long, empty room. You're seated now on a worn velvet settee in the drawing room, the flickering light from the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the heavy drapes and gilded mirrors. The scent of burning wood mixes with the faint trace of lavender and something older, something almost forgotten. Tonight's experiment is one of the most delicate, investigating emotional residue. The Victorian ghost hunters believed that intense feelings, grief, anger, joy, could imprint themselves on a place or object, lingering long after their source had passed. Whitby explains that unlike full-bodied apparitions or audible knocks, emotional residue doesn't manifest visibly. Instead, it is sensed, felt, experienced in the heart and skin. The investigators come prepared with journals, thermometers, and a range of herbs meant to calm or enhance sensitivity. You sit quietly, breathing deeply, noting every change in mood or atmosphere. The room seems to throb with a subtle energy, a pulse that ebbs and flows like the tide. You remember the stories: a young bride's laughter echoing faintly through a hallway, a grandfather's anger simmering in a study, a child's delight lingering in a garden. These were not ghosts as we think of them, but echoes, ghostly impressions of what once was. Historians still debate whether emotional residue is an actual phenomenon or a psychological effect triggered by suggestion and memory. The Victorians leaned heavily into the idea, often using it to explain experiences that defied physical explanation. You close your eyes and focus on the warmth of the fire. You feel a sudden chill run down your spine. Then a faint warmth, like a gentle hand brushing your cheek. You open your eyes to see one of the investigators holding a sprig of rosemary, waving it slowly through the air. You measure the temperature. It rises slightly near the fireplace, then dips toward the window. A fellow observer speaks softly. It's like the room remembers. You nod, feeling the truth in the statement. You write, phenomenon, fluctuating, temperature, and mood shifts, location: drawing room near fireplace, possible cause: emotional residue, effects: subtle, non-physical, deeply personal. The group remains silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackles, and a log shifts, sending a spark into the hearth. The room feels alive, not with spirits, but with memory. You realize that sometimes the past isn't a ghost to be chased, but a presence to be respected. You stand carefully noting the temperature one last time. The warmth stays, and the silence feels full. You're seated at last in the manor's great hall, the room's cavernous space humming with the faint echoes of footsteps long vanished. The flicker of oil lamps casts shifting shadows on tapestries depicting hunts and banquets, and the air is thick with the weight of stories whispered by time. This is where it all comes together. Tonight, the Ghost Club is conducting its final ritual, a collective meditation meant to honor the spirits and the history that surrounds you. No measuring tape, no notebooks, just presence and quiet. Whitby speaks softly, inviting everyone to close their eyes and breathe deeply. The only sounds are the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of collective inhalations. You feel the pulse of the house, the slow throb of memory, the gentle stirring of the unseen. They say ghosts linger where emotions are strongest places of love, loss, hope, and regret. And here in this hall, you can feel them all. Your thoughts drift back to the ectoplasm, the spirit photography, the door jiggles and tapping tables. To the cold cellar walls, the ghostly steps, the moving curtains and whispering libraries. It's a tapestry woven not from fear, but from curiosity and connection. You open your eyes. The room seems softer, warmer. You notice a faint scent of roses drifting in the air. Whitby smiles gently. "They're listening?" he says. You nod. You reach into your pocket and unfold your measuring tape one last time. You measure the width of the hearth 7 feet 4 inches. You measure the height of the ceiling 18 feet 2 inches. You measure the distance from the fireplace to the center of the room 12 feet 7 inches. And then you close the tape and tuck it away. Because tonight, it's not about measurements. It's about presence and the quiet assurance that history is alive in every shadow, every whisper, every breath. You sit back letting the warmth wash over you. The fire dims the lamps, lower their glow. And the manor exhales. You smile. Because now, you belong here. And here, you can rest. The fire's glow softens now, fading into a warm amber haze that drifts lazily across the walls. You breathe in the quiet, the stillness that settles deep into your bones like a familiar lullaby. Outside, the night carries its own rhythm, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the whispered breath of a breeze weaving through the trees. Here, in this quiet moment, the manor rests too. The heavy tapestries no longer seem quite so ominous. Instead, they hold stories folded gently like a well-worn blanket. The faintest traces of laughter and sighs, echoes of lives once lived, linger in the corners, not to haunt, but to remind, to soothe. You feel yourself letting go the weight of the day slipping away as your thoughts slow folding inward, like the curtains that once fluttered with ghostly touch. The measuring tapes, the bells, the shifting shadows, they were all part of a conversation, a delicate dance between curiosity and calm. And now the dance quiets. No longer chasing the unknown, you settle into a soft stillness. A place where mystery need not unsettle, but instead invites you to breathe, to listen, to simply be. So, as you close your eyes, imagine the warmth of the hearth wrapping you like a gentle embrace. Feel the cool night air mingle with the steady beat of your heart. Steady, peaceful, sure. The past and present fold together here in a quiet harmony. In you, yes, you are part of that story now. Rest easy, friend. The house is calm. The spirit's at peace. And so now, may your dreams be gentle and deep. Good night.